How has inflation impacted the politics of Argentina? No economist has been able to decipher what exactly is going on and what's the way forward.
There is no money. We are going to stop printing money. The inflation in 1 month is so high that the prices change every week. The situation became very complicated.
Would you say that the executive under the president is moving forward, but the judiciary is lagging the curve? It has still got 1 foot in yesterday.
We want all the private activity possible and the minimum state regulation necessary.
If you are a resource-rich nation, why aren't you exploiting the resources to benefit your economy? If there is one country that's shunning bad policies of the past and racing ahead into the future in 2024, it is Argentina. Under President Javier Milei, who took charge in December 2023, the country has managed to reduce hyperinflation. It has crafted policies that are positively impacting real estate, and it is bringing a new bounce to the economy. Namaste, I'm Gautam Chikermane. Welcome to the Rising India podcast, a podcast that looks at Indian and foreign affairs from the perspective of India. Let me give a perspective on Argentina first. In area, it is the 8th largest in terms of area after India. India is the 7th largest, Argentina is the 8th. If you remove Maharashtra and Gujarat from India, that is approximately the size of Argentina. So Argentina is 85% of India's landmass, but has only 3.2% of its people. At 46 million, the population of Argentina is approximately that of Odisha. At 640 billion, the GDP of Argentina is 16% of India's, but in terms of per capita income on a PPP basis, an average Argentinian is about 3 times wealthier than an average Indian. In 1913, Argentina was among the world's top 10 economies. Today, it's at number 76. What happened? To discuss this and more, we have with us Mariano Agustin Caucino, who has 2 months ago taken charge as the Argentine ambassador to India. He comes at a time when Argentina is embracing a new policy direction. Welcome to the Rising India podcast, Ambassador. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure, great honor to be here to discuss about things about my country, about the bilateral relations and world affairs. Thank you very much. I have a great appreciation for what you do here in ORF.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. One small tidbit. We are sitting in the ORF library, and it took Ambassador Caucino approximately 10 minutes to reach his seat here because he was busy looking at one book and then the next book and the next book. Inherently, he is an academic. Professionally, he is a lawyer, and currently he is the ambassador. So welcome once again. I will jump straight into the deep end. Argentina has had one of the highest inflation rates since the 1960s. The average annual inflation in 1989 and 90 was 2,600%, which means prices were doubling every 33 days. Approximately every month, prices were doubling. In March 1990, it touched an inflation rate of 20,000, which means in 1 year, the price of bread, which in rupee terms, if it was 10 rupees, became 2,000. While I was putting this podcast together, I was wondering, I had to rethink the way I look at inflation. All countries, in India, for instance, tries to keep inflation below 4% per annum. And Argentina is celebrating an inflation rate of 4% per month. And that's an achievement, even though the annual inflation remains at 260%. It seems like a big achievement, but I have 3 questions. First, what has President Javier Milei done to manage inflation so fast, in just 7 months? What is his economic philosophy?
As you know, as you perfectly are addressing, inflation is terrible for a country. Inflation destroys one society. Inflation is like to a society is what cancer is to a human being, because it makes all the economy, all the macroeconomy very unstable, and it produces the impossibility of people planning what to do with their money, with their life, and with their future. The truth is that many countries face problems of inflation during the past. In the case of Argentina, we had been having problems of inflation, let's say, in the last 80 years, more or less 8 decades, approximately since the 40s. And during very short periods of time, we managed not to have inflation. The longest period of time we did not have inflation was during the 90s. That was the most successful experience Argentina had. Between 1991 to 2001, there was no inflation, and Argentina improved a lot during those years. But after that, after 2002, and especially during the Kirchner administrations in the last 20 years, we get inflation again. And which is the truth about this? The problem is always the same. Government expenditures. Government is spending more money than they have. So the first thing one government does when it spends more money than it is able to have in the budget, they start rising taxes. Then there's one point you can't raise taxes anymore, and even if you rise the taxes, people pay less, so you lose money. Then the second thing, borrowing money, loans is in the country, or domestic borrowing, or outside with the let's say multilateral organizations like IMF or World Bank or whatever. And then the third thing is you start printing money, and that you give money to the people, and people reject money, the local money, the domestic money, and they run to a secure currency, let's say the US dollar or the euro or whatever. So that's the main cause of inflation. And what is the government under President Milei doing in the last months since we took office in late 2023? The first thing is cutting expenditures, because the problem is that during the 20 years of the Kirchner government, the GDP, the public expenditures on the GDP reached 47%. What I mean is, out of $100 of the GDP of the Argentine economy, 47 were took by the states in the three levels of government: national, provinces, or states, as you call here in America, and mayors and cities. 47%. You can imagine that 47% is something that is unacceptable, because you are working for the state. You are working not for you, but for the state. Not for you or your family, but for the state. You know that more than 25 or 30% of public expenditures, it is unacceptable. It's out of reasonable. So what we are doing is a very strict program of cutting expenses. It's very difficult. It's tough. People are they are not in a good position, but people understand, and that's why they are supporting these policies, because they understand, people are understanding in my country that the truth has to be told, and that's why the president has an important support, even when he's taking measures that are not very nice. Nobody wants to say, I can't give you more money.
So what has he done?
Reducing public expenditures. We reduce the number, for example...
Where has he reduced this?
Well, for example, I will tell you examples. We had 25 ministries before, in 2023. Last year, 10 months ago, there were 25 members of cabinet. They reduced that to 9. Then it reduced the subsidies, because there were giving subsidies to transport, to electricity, to all the tariffs. So people were not paying what they had to pay, because the state printed money to cover that situation. This is very difficult. It is a period of time in which people are making a great effort. The Argentine people are doing a great effort, but people realize that the time in which politicians lie to you and say, promise a wonderful future, and then you have a terrible situation, must be over. One very important thing, you were telling 100 years ago, Argentina was a very successful country. But if you go 40 years ago, not so long ago, 40 years ago, when we recovered democracy, the poverty in Argentina was 10%, more or less. Now it is more than 40. So the consequence of these policies of statism policies, leftist policies, and increasing the public expenditures, in the long term, they destroy a country. They make one country with a middle class, a country with a mid-income situation, with a prosperity, and on the verge of development, you convert that into a country with 40% of poverty, which is unacceptable for a country with such huge resources as Argentina.
So my second question is the human side of inflation.
Yes.
How do people cope with inflation? If prices are doubling every month, they're going 2,000% at some times, and this hyperinflation everywhere. How does an average household cope with these rising prices on a day-to-day basis?
Well, the problem is that when societies face this type of realities, which we were facing since the 40s till the last 8 decades, as I was telling you, with different periods. We didn't have hyperinflation during 8 decades, that's impossible. But we had hyperinflation in a number of situations in mid-70s, in the 80s, and last year we were on the verge of hyperinflation when the last government ended. But what people do is that that creates a sort of a speculative culture. And people are all the time speculating to preserve themselves. So the first thing people do is to buy US dollars or to buy goods, for example. Maybe some people buy more things than they need. For if you get your salary,
start hoarding
yes,
toothpaste and
whatever, rice, things that are not, that you can preserve.
Non-perishable.
Of course, you can. Maybe people buy even toilet paper. It seems a joke, but I'm telling you, this happens in countries that have very high inflation. It happened in Germany. You know, in Germany, in the late 20s, and after during the collapse of the Weimar Republic, you know, hyperinflation was terrible in Germany. That was one of the causes of the terrible situation that happened there with the ascent of
even in the COVID lockdowns. Many people hoarded toilet paper across the world. Because
the pandemic, it was so terrible for the entire world. I can talk about my country and some other countries that I know, but in the entire world, it happened that governments started spending more money than they had and printing money, that even great powers face inflation. For example, the US, during the year 2021 and 22 also, during the first 2 years of the Biden administration, it faced a huge problem of inflation.
There were some countries in Europe that had 26% inflation, when they are used to 2% or 1% inflation.
Yes, and in the US, I think it was something like 8, which for the US is terrible. And fortunately, they are managing that, and they were able to reduce that. But that's a problem in every country. And in a so bad managed country as was Argentina for many years, this situation is very terrible. But the most terrible thing in the long term, I would say, is that you destroy the possibilities of future generations. Because if people are living under inflation, so high inflation, you destroy the possibility of those families getting credits, those people getting the possibility to buy a house with a loan, or buy a car, or whatever, or getting good education for their children, because sometimes they need money to send to a good college or university or whatever.
So at a household level, they were selling pesos and buying dollars and keeping their money in dollars.
Yes, when one country faces very high inflation, and the inflation in 1 month is so high that the prices change every week or in the month, what people do is when they earn their salary, they get, let's say, 100 pesos or the local currency, and they go and buy hard currency, US dollars, for example, or euros, or rice, something. So then during the rest of the month, they start selling that, because they preserve their property, because the salary is a property, it's a property right, and property is a fundamental liberty, it's a fundamental right. Property is the result of your work. If I deprive you of property, I am depriving you of your effort. You made an effort to have this. If you are the owner of this, nobody give it to you. That is the result of your work. So that's I could say, I don't know if it's a human right, but it's still an individual right, which is very important.
And my third question around inflation is, how has inflation impacted the politics of Argentina? For instance, even as soon as he has come, President Javier, his first job seems to be to bring inflation under control.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure there would have been presidents before him who would have attempted the same thing. But has inflation impacted Argentinian politics?
Yes. I can give you some examples. For example, in the 40s, inflation appeared in Argentina in the 40s because what happened is that the government started spending too much money. There was no access to credits, and then it started printing money. That inflation came during those years. That happened in the years of the first Peronism. But President Perón was a very intelligent man. He realized that. So in the last years of his administration, let's say Perón ruled Argentina between 46 and 55. But in the last 3 or 4 years of his administration, he started reducing public expenditure. And in that case, he reduced inflation during the last years of his administration. Then we had another president, President Frondizi, which happens to be, as a matter of fact, he was the first president coming here, the first Argentine president coming to India. In the 60s, late 50s, early 60s. He managed to reduce inflation during a couple of years. But then inflation again. Then in the 80s, very short period of time during President Alfonsín, very short period of time, reducing inflation, Plan Austral it was called. And in the 90s, it was the most successful situation under President Menem and the Minister of Economy, Domingo Cavallo. During those years, we had no inflation under the convertibility plan during the 90s. But what happened after that? That the situation became very complicated because the government started spending money again, more money than they had. So what they were not able to print money because during those years in the 90s, it was impossible. The government was not allowed by law to print money without gold reserves or US dollar reserves. So what did they do? They get foreign loans and expansion of the foreign debt. So when we were not able to pay that, the default produced and the devaluation was produced in 2002, and that made a huge mess to the economy. And then came the Kirchner governments, which lasted 16 out of the 20 last years, with the only exception of the administration of President Macri, which he was president just for 4 years. He tried to fix the economy, but things were not possible during that government. I served during that government. I was ambassador to him. He made the best efforts, but we were not able to correct that. And then the Kirchner government came again, and in 4 years they destroyed very, very bad. That's why the President Milei was elected president under this logo and slogan that he says, there is no money. He says, no hay plata. No hay plata in Spanish says, there is no money. There is no money. Very easy. There is no money. We are going to stop printing money.
Yeah, so this reminds me of that of a line that several economists informally say that there are only 4 kinds of economies in the world: advanced economies, emerging economies, Japan, and Argentina.
Yes, yes.
So this is a unique case that Argentina, and even Japan for that matter, haven't been able to, no economist has been able to decipher what exactly is going on and what's the way forward.
That was said in the 80s. Now you can add some more countries, because there are countries without natural resources which are very successful. For example, Singapore, or for example, Israel. I was ambassador there. I served there. What they managed to do with that country, surrounded by very complicated neighbors, is amazing. But Argentina, in the case of Argentina, what happens is that it's a country full of natural resources. As you were saying, it's the size of my country is almost as India, and we have more different climates, because the extension,
the longitude.
Yes, you can fly 5 hours and you will still be in Argentina, from north to south. What happens the same in Chile, no? The very long countries. But in the case of Argentina, we have almost all the climates. Argentina is a huge country. Argentina is resources, in terms of natural resources. It is almost as the U.S. It's not so extreme, as the U.S., but almost.
Yeah, we'll come to the resources. I just want to read out what V.S. Naipaul wrote about Peronism, and which is my next question, bro.
Yeah.
The first Peronist revolution was based on the myth of wealth, of a land waiting to be plundered. Now the wealth has gone, and Peronism is like part of poverty. It is protest, despair, faith, machismo, magic, espiritismo, revenge. It is everything and nothing. It's a very sad paragraph that encapsulates an entire philosophy. So Peronism has delivered perhaps the worst for the Argentinian economy. Tell us, what is Peronism? How did it play out in Argentina? And how is President Milei changing it?
Well, Peronism is a very difficult subject to explain to foreign people. It is even difficult to understand for Argentines. But what I have to tell you is...
Would it be say it's extreme left policies?
No,
or
no.
That's too simplistic?
Yes. First of all, Peronism is a movement, the political movement founded by General Perón. And what you have to think about that, it is, you know, sometimes they difference in political science. They tend to differentiate, to separate the concept of a political party and a political movement. It is not exactly the same. Sometimes we use the words in like synonyms, but they are not. In the case of Peronism, it is called as a movement. But you can say the same in some way in France, for example, Gaullism. You know one thing that General de Gaulle said one time, that in France, everyone in France has been a Gaullist, was a Gaullist, or would be a Gaullist. And Perón copied that phrase, and he said one time, very intelligent, witty, he said, everyone in Argentina is a Peronist, or was a Peronist, or will be a Peronist. But going to your point, it is very difficult to understand what Peronism means. We can study what Perón made to Argentina when he was president between 46 to 55. Then what happened to that movement founded by Perón in the last 8 decades? Because
so let me just read out a few of the 20 truths of Peronist justicialism.
Yes.
Okay, I'm not going to read all 20.
No. Yeah.
Justicialism is a philosophical school of life. It is simple, practical, popular, and endowed with deeply Christian and humanitarian sentiments.
Yes.
As a political doctrine, justicialism establishes a fair balance between the rights of the individual and those of the community.
Yes.
As an economic doctrine, justicialism achieves a true form of social economy by placing capital at the service of the national economy and this at the service of social welfare. And as a social doctrine, justicialism presides over an adequate distribution of social justice, giving to each person the social rights he is entitled to. It's very close to communism.
Yes, but
it's not communism.
No, but Perón was never a socialist. It's very difficult to understand because, for example, the Peronists say that there are 3 rules of Peronism, which is the country should achieve political sovereignty, social justice, and economic autonomy.
Nobody can fight with that.
That who can? Everyone is all right with that. But the problem is that the measures you take to get that objectives, the work. So what I have to tell you is that historically, in the last 8 decades, we had a lot of governments coming from Peronism. After Perón died, we have a number of governments which were part of the Peronist country, and they did exactly the opposite. Because, for example, in the 90s, I was telling you about the 90s, the government in the 90s was a president coming from the Peronist party, and he was pro-capitalist, pro-American, and nothing to do. You will share what it has been done during those years. It was absolutely very similar to what President Milei is trying to do. And even President Milei has admiration for President Menem, and he was a Peronist. But then the Kirchners do exactly the opposite. So that's why it's very difficult to understand Peronism, because it's not a political party. In the Peronist movement, there are people in the left and people in the right. There are people socialists and there are capitalists. In some way, I don't know if it is very elegant to make comparative situations, because I am an ambassador, I should not be. But in this conversation we have, and we are talking about history, but in some way you can compare with other movements, as I was telling in the case of France, maybe Mexico, for example, the PRI, which is the Partido Revolucionario Institucional, which governed Mexico many decades. And they had governments on the left, governments on the right. So I think it is very, very, very difficult, almost impossible, to understand this type of Latin American movements, political movements out of Latin America. Even in Brazil, for example, the legacy of Getúlio Vargas, it is very difficult to know if he was a leftist or he was a socialist or he was a right man. It's very difficult. You have to see each period of time. But talking about what's happening now or what happened in the recent past of Argentina, the truth is that during the last 20 years, as I was telling you, we had a family ruling the country, the Kirchner family, with the first Néstor Kirchner, 4 years, then Cristina Kirchner, 8 years, and then Alberto Fernandez, which was a deputy of them, for 4 years. So they governed this country, our country, for 16 out of the last 20 years. They were coming from the Peronist party, and they made left-hand policies. That's absolutely true. So to try to understand the reason.
So you can be a Peronist without being left or right.
Absolutely.
Or you both can follow the Peronist way.
Absolutely.
And you can say something and do the exact opposite as well.
Absolutely. As I was telling you, in the 90s, we have the experience of a government coming from Peronism, and they made absolutely pro-capitalist policies. And as I know you, if you were an Argentine, you would support that government in the 90s. But you won't support the Kirchner government, as I did. I supported the 90s, not here. And so it is, Peronism is like a sort of political culture more than an ideology. Ideology is not exactly what defines the movement. It is a political culture in the sense of it interprets very well the historical or the essence maybe of Argentina. And the other traditional party in Argentina, the Partido Radical, it is also a movement. And it is inside that party, there are also people in the left and people on the right. Even some people from that party are supporting Javier Milei. There are many Peronists supporting Javier Milei, because there are people in the Peronism which are in the, let's call, right, or they are conservative, we can say. It is very, very amazing. Politics in Latin America are very difficult to understand in many countries, not all of them, but in many countries. Other countries are more divided between left and right. For example, Chile is more divided left and right. You will find easier to understand. But Argentina and in some Mexico and in some way Brazil, it is difficult to understand.
So that's why it's classified as a kind of an economic thing of its own. The developed, the underdeveloped, Japan and Argentina.
Well, Argentina was a country that Argentina never became a full developed country, but it was almost a developed country. Let's say, in the 1920s, 1930s, there was a problem of distribution of wealth at that time. But, and even then, in the 60s, for example, in the 60s, in terms of development, Argentina was not developed, but it was very close to development. It was a country with, let's say, 80 or 90% of the people were middle class. There were some few rich and very few poor people. And unfortunately, we are not under...
I think it was the sign of the times, because even in India, between 1947 and 1980, approximately the Peronist years, from 1946 to
you have socialist policies.
We had 5 industrial policies, each of which destroyed the economy. and kept us behind.
I know.
And reforms happened in 1991.
I know.
And from then, it's been a much better economy. India has moved forward.
Because one thing that we can't forget, I think, when we analyze our countries, you analyze India or I analyze Argentina, but one thing we have to consider is the global stage, because during those years we were under the rules of the Cold War, and the Cold War affected all of us, even the great powers or the small, all of us. In the case of Latin America, the Cold War was a scenario of the Cold War. Of course, Asia was a scenario of the Cold War. Every corner of the world was a scenario. And in that case, I think, unfortunately, for Latin America, it was very bad because that evolved in some countries, in mine, of course, to an extreme of violence. And the societies were very divided in violence, with a division that unfolded in violent terms. And it ended in a sort, not a civil war, but a sort of civil war. I have to be very prudent with the word, but sort of civil war.
That's the diplomat in you talking.
Yeah.
So from 1958 all
Yes.
through 2022,
Yes.
Argentina has been approached and granted loans by the
Yeah.
IMF 23 times.
Yes.
Okay, that's once in every 3 years. Between 1982 and 20, it has defaulted 5 times. In 1982, in 1989, in 2001, in 2014, and in 2020. In 2001, it had 5 presidents in 2 weeks. So that is the political part. We will come to it later. Today, Argentina is IMF's biggest debtor with a loan liability of 43 billion, which is more than the next 4 countries, which is Egypt, Ukraine, Pakistan, and Ecuador combined. My question is, how have the economic reforms from 1990s played out in Argentina? You had trade reforms, you had tax reforms, you had financial sector reforms, you had banking reforms. What have they delivered? India's path-breaking reforms happened around the same time in 1991 that Argentina's did. And they have served us very well. Why haven't Argentina's economic reforms delivered similar outcomes?
Well, it's a very good question. Because what happened to Argentina, the tragedy of the recent Argentine history, is that during the 90s, we made a lot of reforms, as you had been doing, in the terms of deregulation of the economy, liberating the economy, and cutting expenditures, and having inflation very low, and making, let's say, reasonable foreign policy in the New World Order that emerged after the end of the Cold War. But the problem is that as you continued those reforms, you started those reforms early 90s, 91, and then you continue, and even this government
continuing till today.
is and even the modern administration is developing even more those reforms. But the problem is that Argentina, in 2002, it made a sort of reversion of those reforms. So that happened, unfortunately, when the Kirchners came to power in 2003. So we made all the reforms to become a modern country, to increase production, to have a stable currency, and they did exactly this. For example, we had a privatization of state-run companies. That during the 80s, we had a problem, a very huge crisis with the state-run companies, because there was no electricity, no telephone, nothing worked under the state-run companies. Unfortunately, they are very bad. We privatized them, and then they nationalized them again. So when you do that, you destroy the confidence on one country. For example, the system of pensions. Pension system during the 90s, there was a reform. You could stay in the state pension system, or you can go to a private pension system. You can choose. People that went to the private sector pension system, they had an account with money, they put in every month money. Then they nationalized that, and everything went to the public accounts of the state. So you know what happens in that case. You lose your savings. So they destroy the pension system. The problem is that the reversion of those reforms that they were very good in the 90s happened during the years in the 2000s, and that policies were very bad. Poverty increased a lot. Poverty was 15% at that time in the late 90s. It is more than 40 today. When you take one country and you put socialist measures to a country, you destroy one country. Even if that country is rich, even if that country is full of natural resources. I don't want to talk about other countries. It's not my what I have to do here. I'm at this time. But for example, in my region, in South America, Latin America, there are countries full of natural resources, and their economy is destroyed because of the socialist policies. One is full of oil, for example, and people are suffering there. I can tell you, everyone knows. Venezuela.
So the experience in India has been a little different. Governments have come and gone. Political parties have come and gone, and even their ideological leanings or economic priorities have changed. But reforms have continued. So they began with Prime Minister Narasimha Rao. They went on through Vajpayee. They continued under Dr. Manmohan Singh, and they are continuing. So
that's why you're successful. That's why you are becoming one of the fifth largest economy in the world.
So what began with under constraints, India was on a balance of payments crisis,
yes.
And that's when the first reforms happened. So what began under constraints have slowly, because of political strength, become convictions.
Yes.
And now we are moving towards consensus. So constraints, convictions, consensus.
Yes.
That has been the path for India's reforms over the past 3 decades.
Yes.
But all through the economy, and the pension is a problem. For instance, now after 20 years of pension reforms, we have reversed them. And so I think these going back and forth, or 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, is possibly the way that noisy democracies function. Like China wouldn't have a problem like this. Any authoritarian regime wouldn't have such a problem. Yeah. It is only democracies where the will of the people, the voting compulsions create these fissures in the economic.
Yes, pensions is always a problem in the whole world because of a good reason, which is people are living more. No, when Bismarck created the pension system in Germany 150 years ago, people lived 50 years or 55 or 60, not more than that. So, but the truth is that the pension systems in most of the countries have to be reformed because people are living too much. You can't pay people living 30 more years without working. It's a problem. That's a problem.
Unique case in Europe is that people are living longer, but are not producing children. The fertility rate has come down.
Well, that's why the population is reducing. So
that's right. Is that the case in Argentina? Is
in
that
Argentina,
something similar?
No, population is not increasing. We should increase more. But it's not decreasing dramatically as in some of the European countries. But it's still a problem. Demography is a problem in many countries. Yeah.
So let me then move to pure politics.
Yes.
There have been several military coups because of these political fissures.
Yes.
You've had several military coups in 1930, in 1943, in 1955, in 1966, and all the way till 1976. Yes. What did these coups achieve? Or what did they destroy in terms of policy and governance? Did they come to heal the nation, or did they end up destroying it further? Let's forget the part that democracy is smothered and an army is ruling aside. But in terms of pure delivery, have military governance delivered something better?
Let me put it this way: in the long term, it was very bad. Because that destroys the stability of a country and destroys the constitutional order. For example, that happened to many Latin American countries, almost all of them. For example, one country that escaped to that rule was Costa Rica. I have the opportunity to serve there as ambassador. They have deep admiration. They were able to escape to the rule of coup d'etat every year. But all of the other countries in Latin America, unfortunately, or almost all, we had this history of revolutions, especially during the Cold War era. But even before, because the first one we had, it was in 1930 and in 1943. But it would be too long if I talk each of the coup. If they
no, just as a general thing. So how did the military get in? There must have been underlying weaknesses.
The truth is that in my country and in other countries also in the region, during those years, the military were a sort of political legitimate actor. That's the truth. That's not correct, but that's the truth. If I have to speak from the historical point of view, what I'm trying to explain is that when those revolutions happened, people, I won't say that people accepted, all of the people, but some people accepted, and it was in some way predictable that to happen. So that was very, very bad, because after that the institutional life of the country was destroyed, and especially because the last dictatorship, it was very, very bad in terms of human rights.
The last was in 1976.
Yes, it was terrible. It was terrible. But the truth is,
30,000 people, 29,000
well,
people were killed.
The figure is discussed. The accurate figure, it is around 9,000. But the truth is that many people were killed, many people were disappeared. But the truth also is that the tragedy of the 70s did not started that day. The tragedy was happening before, because left guerrilla groups were killing people and people and people. So if you take the long term, between let's say in the end of the 60s and the end of the 70s, my country was under very violent times with killings from the left and the right. I insist, it was not only in Argentina. It was something that happened in all Latin America, or almost all Latin America, and it is the consequence of the Cold War, because the exportation of communism and socialism by violent means since the Cuban Revolution, then they spread the revolution. They tried to spread the revolution all around the region, and that provoked a lot of violence, and then the states reacted, sometimes not in the correct ways, through military government.
Do you think there is a possibility of a military takeover once again in 2024 or going forward?
No.
Because they tend to create economic uncertainty. They give signals to global investors.
No. Democracy is absolutely consolidated in Argentina in the last 40 years, and democracy is working. The constitution works. There is a legal transfer of power in the last 40 years. There were some governments that I liked and some governments that I did not like. Most of them I didn't like. But the rules work and the constitution works. There are elections.
Is there any chance of the military being in charge but allowing civilian governments in the face, for instance, as in the case of Pakistan?
No, not today. Not today in my country. There were some experiences of that. For example, in the case of the 1962 coup, which was a very strange situation, the revolution that removed President from power, then there was a constitutional, the President of the Senate took power, but the military were remaining in power. That situation is quite similar to one that happened in Uruguay in 1973, which is called, in the political science, it's called Bordaverización, because there was a constitutional president, but the military took power, but they left him as the head of state,
yes,
in order to maintain a sort of legitimacy. Yeah. But in Argentina, that happened in 1962. In some, not exactly the same situation, but in some. But I would say today that democracy is consolidated in my country, absolutely consolidated. It is consolidated in Latin America, with the exception, unfortunately, of at least 3 governments that are not democratic, which are, of course, Cuba, of course, Venezuela, and of course Nicaragua. That they are not democratic countries. Let me tell you one thing. It's important at this. In the Western Hemisphere, in the Americas, we have the system of the OAS, Organization of American States, and we are all committed to democracy. There is an obligation in the Western Hemisphere, an obligation of promotion of human rights and democracy. But there are, unfortunately, 3 countries that are not under that rule, and human rights are absolutely violated in those countries.
Okay, let's look ahead. So now, what is this anarcho-capitalist and libertarian economic philosophy of President Milei? How does it play out? What does it hope to accomplish?
Well, President Milei says that he's not a liberal, but a libertarian. No, You know that the word liberal it is something that it has to be explained, because liberal in America, for example, and I think here also, when you say liberal in the U.S., you are talking about a socialist or or the let's say the left-hand part of the Democratic Party, and then so you tend to divide, at least in the American system, liberals and conservatives. In Argentina or in some Latin American countries, when we say liberal, we are not talking about socialists, but people promoting capitalist policies. Let's say like it was Margaret Thatcher or Ronald Reagan's policy. But libertarians is a movement even more that they don't trust on the state, even in the more small expression of them. So what they are, the libertarian ideas promote is the idea that the government has to be reduced to a minimum extent, and it has to conserve the policies that are not being able to be developed by private people. For example, foreign policy. For example, defense. For example, security. For example, justice.
Law and order.
Law and order. But the rest of the, and of course, public education, no? And public health. But the rest of the things have to be made by the private sector. For example, building has to be made by the private sector. All the economic developments should be done by the private sector. It's like a sort of way to say that we want all the private activity possible and the minimum state regulation necessary. That would can say that in some way. You still need regulation from the law, because the law, it cannot be privatized, right? But it is like a sort of minimum state intervention in order to preserve the possibilities of the private sector.
What is this anarcho-capitalist?
Well, I think it is a phrase that it is used in the press. I would say because it refers to anarchy, no? That anarchy is not.
So President Milei says that he is an anarcho-capitalist.
But I think it might be a way of explaining the thing, because anarchy is very problematic, no?
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit. Now you say that he is privatizing or less state, and there is no money, so there's less state, etc.
Yeah.
Yesterday there was a judgment that has come out from a court where when President Milei tried to privatize the football clubs, the court has ruled that this cannot be done, it's unconstitutional. I forget the exact words. So now, is this the empire fighting back? Is it the state fighting the executive? Is it judiciary versus executive?
Well, Argentina is a country, the Argentine constitutional system is copied of the American, no? It is very similar to the US. So in all of our countries, it's almost the same. So we have three powers. There is a division of power. We have the executive power, we have the judiciary, and we have the legislative power, which is divided into houses, the House of Representatives and the Senate. There are some, it is normal that one power can do one thing and the other one, it is difficulties of that. Of course, we would like...
But anybody would think that privatizing a football club is not a big deal. It's not a national interest.
No. In fact, what the government is trying to do is to have the people, let's say, that football clubs or teams can be managed by the private sector or by associations, let's say, and without intervention of the state. It's giving the opportunity. What government is trying to do is to give people the opportunity to organize themselves and to fulfill what the constitution wants.
Would you say that the executive under the president is moving forward, but the judiciary is lagging the curve? It has still got one foot in yesterday. Because it doesn't seem to be in tune with what...
Yes, some people think that, and there are some reasons to think that might be happening or might happen in some way. But the fact is, I think that will be evolving. I hope. Of course, the key is the Supreme Court. You know, I always talk about history because I like history. The most important, the most case you can remember is what happened with Roosevelt when he made his great deal and the Supreme Court was rejecting his policies, no, in the 30s in the US. But that happens to for example, in the 90s when we had these I think very good policies of deregulation of the economy. There were some decisions of the court, of the judiciary, might be complicated, but it's still the system. We have to respect the system, I think, and the Constitution works. The Constitution means that the power of citizens are above the power of government, because we understand, when we are talking about libertarian, what we understand is a very strong concept, which is that the government is made by men and not men by government. And the government has to serve the people and not the people serving the government. I always remember what Ronald Reagan said when his inauguration speech.
But you know, where President Milei has been able to have success is in the rent control.
Yes.
In the last 6 months, the availability of real estate has doubled.
Yes.
I've never heard of such a thing. It's fantastic.
Yes.
I think people were not giving their properties out on rent or whatever the reason.
Yes.
So what is this rent? What has he done in rent control that has suddenly become, it's a global success story?
The key to that is freedom. It's freedom of contracts. Because if you have a house, for example, and I say from the state, from the government, I would say, you can't ask for that rent more than, let's say, $100 or, I don't know, 10,000 rupees, for example. And I say, you can rent that house between $100 and $200. Not more than that, not less than that. So maybe that house is 300. So you say, oh, if government doesn't allow me, I don't put that house for rent. I will lend that house to my son, for example, whatever. So after those restrictions were lifted, people started saying, okay, I will rent my house. I will put my house on rent. And the market will say if that house is 100, 200, 300, whatever. And when the most amount of personal, individual freedom and economy gets, economy is growing. That's happened in all the countries. You experience this, as you were telling, in the last 30 years. Which was the rate of increase of the economy in India, let's say in the first 4 decades of the independent life, and which was the rate of economic expansion in the last 3 decades, and especially in this last decade. This is not a miracle. That when you apply correct policies, things happen.
So in the first 40 years, India's growth rate was 6.5%. In the last 3 decades, it's 8.5%. And I'm talking about dollar adjusted nominal growth rates.
Because, you know, my friend, the truth is, at the end of the day, the countries develop or don't develop fundamentally because of the type of policies that the governments apply. Of course, there is a question of natural resources apart from that. But, for example, what happened when Germany was divided? West Germany was a rich country. East Germany was a poor country. What happens in Korea? South Korea is a rich country. North Korea under communism is a poor country. What happens with the Cubans, for example? The Cubans, in Cuba, they are very poor under a socialist government for more than 6 decades. They go to Miami, to Florida, and they are rich. So the problem is that policies you put. And what we are doing now, and the Argentine government is trying to move forward, is to give people back the rights in terms of economic freedom and deregulation, and allowing people to make their economic life under the rule of the Constitution, under the rule of law, but the contracts are sacred. If I want to sell you this to you, and you and me are okay, and this is a legal contract, the state has nothing to do with us. That's what we are trying to do.
So let me change tack a bit on currencies. In the past month, the peso has fallen by 3%. It has fallen by 35% in the past year. 766% in the past 5 years and 5,800% in the past decade. Given that this is getting out of hand and therefore a lot of people, as you mentioned earlier, are shifting to holding dollars instead of pesos.
Yes.
How do you see, how does Argentina see cryptocurrency, the rise of cryptocurrency? Is it taking it seriously? Could there be a paradigm shift? Because now the economy seems to be stabilizing. Will a currency stabilization move that coincides with the embracing crypto also follow? How are you looking at crypto?
I don't know.
We are looking at it with suspicion.
Yes.
It's dangerous. It's
well, I think the birth of cryptocurrencies, in some way, it is. I think I'm not an expert on that. I think it was like an answer of the advance of governments on people. So it is like a sort of place to hide some of your property. But I think not many people have cryptocurrency because it's very. For example, I don't have. I made the mistake of not buying.
You did the smart thing because until the
Bitcoins.
currency gets legitimized into a digital currency,
Yes.
sanctified
Yes,
by
I
the
know.
central banks, it is just a random software.
But so many people made so huge amounts of money.
They made money in tulips.
The first person that talked to me about the Bitcoin, he told me you have to buy a Bitcoin. It was if I would have what he had done, maybe today I would have a lot of money. But in Argentina, I think it is not nothing different from the rest of the world in that sense. I don't know if it is so important.
Okay.
Or not more than important than in other countries. No, of course.
So from Europe to US, and even now we are seeing such in the politics of discussion, not the government, but in the politics, that there seems to be a return to socialism, while Argentina seems to be going the other way. And earlier, I remember when Argentina was in crisis, had a problem with the US because US was going capitalist, Argentina was going communist. Now, Argentina seems to be going capitalist, and USA in these coming elections is headed towards a socialist in case one party wins. These conflicts are happening. How does Argentina stay in this? How does it steer these clash of ideologies?
I can talk on behalf of my country. I can talk about other countries. But what I know is that when countries develop these socialist ideas, they become poor. And I think we have experiences, especially in the last 20 years. Because in the last 20 years, the government made an expansion of public expenditure so high that it exhausted the private sector. Because when you have that we are more or less 50 million people, 48, something like that. When you have that only 7 or 8 or 9 million people are working in the private sector, and the rest of the people are employed by the state, by the government, in the 3 levels of government, and you have pensions of people that did not put money during his life, but they created a fake pension. Who pays? At the end of the day, who pays? All those policies are very nice. Socialism is beautiful. If you say, oh, I will give you money, I will do this, but at the end of the day, who pays for that? So that I think people realize that it is a sort of the end of dreams in some way about this situation. So I think that if some countries are going in that way, unfortunately, if that happens, they will suffer because we suffer a lot. So I think we made a lesson about that situation.
Okay, I'll move to foreign affairs. Argentina is part of Mercosur with Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Bolivia. It's part of G21 with the African Union. It was G20 when under your presidency, India made it G21. Yes. But why did it decline to become a member of BRICS?
Yes.
Some say that it's because China dominates the grouping and Argentina is more aligned with the US, therefore it declined to join BRICS. If that is the case, what is the alternative arrangement in the East? How does Argentina engage with, let us say, Japan, India, Indonesia?
Well, we are in the G20, the G21 now. No, we observe this. We think, when I say we, is the current government. Last year, during the campaign, there was this debate in Argentina about going to BRICS or not, because there was a sort of invitation of an expansion of BRICS and getting Argentina. But that happened in a very complicated moment for us, in the middle of a campaign. At that time, there were three main candidates for the presidency. The government candidates, of course, they were happy to become members of BRICS, and the two opposition candidates, one was Milei, there was Patricia Bullrich, which today is the Minister of Security. She's part of government because she supported Milei in the runoff. They say no. I think you have to take account of at least three things: the special circumstances of the election, the fact that we observe some of these ideas like sort of tool by some powers competing with others, and we don't want. We are not a great power, so we let's say this. We would try to reduce the impact of great power competition. We had nothing to win out of that, and then there is a very, very complicated situation, because the expansion of BRICS was including the presence of Iran. And as you know, for us, the Islamic Republic of Iran has a government that since the revolution in 1979 promotes an agenda that includes the use of terrorism, and we were victims of that. We were victims of terrorism in 1992, 1994, with the blow of the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires and the Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires. And unfortunately, we have a big problem. Iran is a great country. Iran is an inheritor of a great culture, but Iran is governed by a government, a regime that is a sort of enemy of Argentina.
So wouldn't informal engagements that happen on the sidelines of various meets be a good place where you can talk freely?
Some people think that. Yes, some people think that the decision was made it was not the right opportunity, and the decision, the foreign policy decision, was to enhance the relations with the members with those countries, very important countries, of course, in the bilateral arena, in the bilateral way. For example, in this case, in the case of India, as a matter of fact, I can tell you, I'm the first political ambassador here in the whole history of the Argentine-India relations. And that happened because the government decided to send an envoy, a person that is not absolutely a typical diplomat, but some person coming from the political arena, as I was. Although I was an ambassador before, I'm still a person coming from politics. So in that sense, it is a sort of recognition of the importance of India, the growing importance of this country. And so we decided to enhance the relationship from the bilateral point of view.
Earlier you mentioned that you have good resources in Argentina.
Yes.
In fact, it has some of the world's largest shale gas and shale oil and gas reserves. I would imagine it's not very difficult to extract them. So what's preventing you from doing that? If you are a resource-rich nation, why aren't you exploiting the resources to benefit your economy?
We are. You know that in Argentina there is a huge reserve of oil and gas in the so-called Vaca Muerta, which is in the south of Argentina. It is a huge reserve especially of gas. But you have to explore that, you have to extract that, and then you have to transport that from it is close to the Andes, close to the frontier with Chile. And then there is a valley, and you have to transport that by pipelines to the coast, and then you can export to the whole world. I'm very happy that I can announce that yesterday, in fact, today in the morning, the president of the national oil company left this country. We were here for 2 days, having very important conversations with Indian companies and with the Indian petrol minister. and president and CEO of YPF, which is the national gas company, the national oil company. Horacio Marin was here, and we were discussing about the opportunity of enhancing cooperation in the field of energy with India. So we are, the government is thinking exactly what you have said, that we have to develop that, we have to extract that oil and gas for Argentina and for export. And India is a great buyer of energy, because you are growing so much that you need unlimited amounts of energy. And I think we are going to be able to work on that and enhance that cooperation. I'm very happy. What happened before? You are asking with your question is very legitimate. Why didn't you do that before? Well, the truth is we didn't do that before because of bad political decisions, wrong decisions about socialist policies. And when you have a government with those type of policies, nobody wants to invest. Who wants to invest in a country where the state can say, this is yours today, but might be not yours tomorrow, because I can put you a tax that destroys your property? That's what happens in socialist countries.
But that could happen. Suppose President Milei does not win the next elections and somebody else comes. So again, a nationalization threat can loom over investors who are putting money out.
Well, that's why government is working so hard in order to deliver and in order to win the next election and to be able to have a more important majority in Congress, so as to give that opportunity, of course. Now, nothing is written on stone. The future is what we are going to do from now onwards. And we have to learn from the past. The past, I love history. You were telling me that when I entered this here, I was looking the books, and history is important if it gives you an opportunity to learn something what happened before and not to make the same mistakes in the future, because history is not repeated automatically. But you can make, through analogy, you can study. I used to say when I was a professor that studying history is to a policymaker or a government official as making exercises to people, to a sportsman. You have to learn and you have to practice. And the only way to practice politics is reading history.
Likewise for lithium. So you have huge deposits of lithium. So you have the resources for the present and you have a resource for the future. Lithium is the energy currency of the future. Energy, or let's say the element of the future. Again, the same problem. You are not exploiting it.
We are exploiting. Now there is we are starting, of course. For example, I can announce you, there are Indian companies that are making investments there in the province of Catamarca. There is a state in the north of Argentina. We are a federal government. We have states called provinces. It is almost the same as here, the states you have here, or the American states in the US. And in the case of lithium, there is an investment of a number of countries, including India, in the province of Catamarca, to exploit that. And Argentina, it is for you, for India, let's say a guarantee of supply of lithium and to reduce the dependency you have of lithium from other countries.
You're not thinking of forward integration, for instance, making batteries yourself, manufacturing batteries?
Yes, of course. If we were able to do, we will do. Yeah, but we can do that and we can export. I don't know exactly the technical features of that. Maybe I don't know which is the investment you need to do that. I really don't. I'm a lawyer, not a technician. But what I know is that we have those resources and that we are exploiting them because this is a critical resource for the world, and for one country as this one that is developing the electrical vehicles or whatever, you need this. You need lithium, and I think you need a diverse supply of those materials not to depend on one country. You need to buy from a number of countries.
Okay. Finally, last few questions.
Yeah.
What do you, Ambassador Caucino, propose to do with your stint in India this time? Every ambassador that I have met has said that they want to sign a free trade agreement with India. Do you have any such goals? You are already working with an FTA with the EU. Do you think you want to pursue an FTA with India?
Well, it would be, of course, it would be very good. But in the case of Argentina, to make that negotiations, it has to be done with Mercosur, because we are members of Mercosur with Brazil, with Uruguay and Paraguay, and the trade policy has to be made by the 4 countries. No, there is an obligation under the Treaty of Asunción, which is formation of the Mercosur, to work together. So there is an agreement of commercial preferences between Mercosur and India. It was signed, I think, in 2004. And I know that India, because I know that your embassy there, under the leadership of Ambassador Batia, they are trying to propose that to Mercosur, which is now currently under the presidency of Uruguay. And that will be very, very good. I don't know if that's possible to be done in the next years, but I don't know exactly. But concerning your question, I would say that the task I have here on future, and that's why I'm so happy to be here. I'm so glad to have the opportunity to serve here in this period. And that's why the reason, because I came here, I will tell you something. I asked to be ambassador to India, because when the new government took power, the foreign minister, the new foreign minister, she's going to be here next month, she asked me, and her team, they asked me, where do I want to go? Where do I think I was going to be able to serve my country in this period, in this opportunity? And I said that I wanted to go to India, because Asia is the stage of the future of the world. Here in Asia, 60% of the population of the world lives in Asia. 60%. 40% of the GDP of the world is explained by Asia. And in Asia, which are the most important countries in Asia? Of course, India is one of them. It is China, India, Japan, many others, many important countries, but India is a rising power in the 21st century. So when they asked me, I said, the place to go at this moment of the stage is to go to India. And for me, I work every day to increase this relationship and to make my colleagues and my fellow citizens in Argentina to realize the importance of the Indian-Argentine relationship.
So, if not FTA, our trade, Argentina is about $650 billion. India is $4 trillion.
Yes.
And the trade between the two is just $4.6 billion.
Yes.
What are the hurdles that in the way of making $4 billion, $10 billion, or $25 billion?
We could have more. We can have more.
Yes.
Today, the trade is around $5 billion, around, because in the year 2022, it was 6.4. But then, because of climate problems in my country, it was reduced. But let's say 5 billion. It could be by much more, of course. It could be 10 million or 12 million, or it could be more. The problem is that now we are exporting soybean oil and sunflower oil. We are the #1 provider of soybean oil and the #3, I think, in soybean oil. But it is very difficult to export other things, because here in this country, unfortunately, you have very high rates and tariff and restrictions to trade. If I want to import Argentine wine here, is 150% of taxation. So, and I can understand from the Indian point of view that you have to protect your farmers or you have to protect your sectors, but we are all dealing with that. The countries here, the embassies here, our task is to get the possibility to open some markets, and if you are able to help us with that, it will be very good. We are all the days working on that, on the possibility of expanding, enhancing those possibilities. Argentina might be a great provider in terms of energy. That's what we were discussing with the president of the oil national company in Argentina during these days, and in terms of food security. Though, at least those two things.
So energy security and food security.
Yes. At least.
Okay.
Many other things, but at least.
So final word, what's your experience been? How much of India have you traveled? What are you looking forward to? Where are you planning to go?
I came here to India last year when I was not an ambassador with my wife, and we were here for less than 2 weeks, and we went to the usual tourist places as Agra, the Taj Mahal, Jaipur, Udaipur, and of course Delhi, and we love it. It was a very nice experience that made us, that visit made me reaffirm my idea of asking to be ambassador here. And since I have been here just 2 months and 1 week. I arrived here June 23 and I presented credentials July 11. I went to Agra again, and I went to Bengaluru and to Mumbai. Yes, but there's so much work here in Delhi that you have to be. It is difficult to be in all places, and this country is so huge. But I'm going to Calcutta next week.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Caucino.
Oh, thanks to you.
It's been a delightful conversation with you, and I wish you the very best in your stay here.
Thank you very much, and my congratulations to ORF, which is, and you know, I knew about ORF before coming here, because in Cali, the Council of Foreign Affairs in Argentina, they are working with ORF, and ORF is wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you.